welcome to Tuesdays with Morrissey. I'm your host, Adam Morrissey. Today I'm excited to be joined by one of the most authoritative thought leaders on the topic of conscious leadership, and that's Rodolfo Carrillo, whose book, Being Leadership, inspired me personally to learn and grow. But in addition to that, Rodolfo helps companies and individuals become more authentic leaders and has worked with companies like AWS, Ernst & Young, and Marriott International. Rodolfo, how's it going today?
Everything's going pretty good. I'm honored to be here with you, Adam. So thank you for having me.
Well, it's an honor to be here with you too. This book, I just thought you really nailed it on the head, and it met me where I was, and found me at the right time. So, really, when I think about conscious leadership, I think it's interesting with some of the trends going on in the world. Especially over the last couple of decades, when you think about the shift from factory workers to knowledge workers. And how that impacts the type of leaders we need in the world. How do you think about that?
I think that's a very important shift in the way we're doing business right now, because we used to hire people and train them to do one thing over and over and over again for many years. And right now, most companies hire people to think and to make decisions. And leading people who are thinking is much harder than leading people who are just doing. Because now you have to convince people about their thought, about thinking the way you're thinking and seeing what you're seeing, so that they actually make decisions in alignment with what you want to do. So it becomes more of a challenge. And usually the best workers are the ones who can think outside the box, who can come up with creative solutions. And that's what we're inviting in business. And that, for me, what the most interesting thing is, as leaders, we have to learn to not be the smartest person in the room and feel comfortable with that. And that is a challenge, because it challenges our ego directly, right? And the way we think about ourselves, right? So it is a huge change.
Yeah, I always think it's amazing that in business that more than one person can come together to do anything within an organization and external. So, one of the key themes you talk about is conscious leadership. How would you define that?
Conscious leadership for me is an ability to influence others, so that from a state of self-awareness, that means I am aware of what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I'm doing, so that others will voluntarily and enthusiastically work together towards a common goal. So I want to break this up, because it's really important. It's an ability, so we can actually develop it. Like, we can train on being a leader, and our ability is for influencing, not using power. And I like differentiating those two. Because using power is very simple. It's like, I come to you and I tell you, Adam, do this, because I am the boss and you have to do it. Influence is, I convince you to do it, so that you voluntarily, that's important, you don't feel coerced into it, or you don't feel pressured into it. And enthusiastically, you feel good about it. We work towards a common goal. And in order to be able to do that, it is very important for us as leaders to be aware of what we're thinking, what we're feeling, and the way we're showing up physically. Because even the way we stand or we use our hands in our communication has an influence on the other person. I usually like using examples of, if I come up to you and I close my hands and I lean back and I look away, and then I tell you, Adam, I want to hear what you're saying, I'm sending very contradictory messages, right? With my whole body, I'm telling you, I don't care what you have to say, but my words are telling the opposite. So, and we pick up on that on a subconscious level, and sometimes on a very conscious level, but most of the time, or for sure, on a subconscious level. So the way we project ourselves is also very important.
I since reading Being Leadership, I found myself sitting with my palms open underneath my desk, when working with team members. When you're describing conscious leadership, it definitely does stand in stark contrast to what most people experience. from management and leadership. How do you think we got to this current status quo of the kind of dictatorship leader?
Well, I think the world was in survival mode, or humanity was in survival mode for millennia. Mm-hmm. And in survival mode, authoritarian leadership or dictatorships are very useful, right? When we are at war, we need people to step up and say, do this, do that, move quickly. I don't want people doubting. And if anyone doubts, like, they need a kick in the butt and they need to move, right? And the world was in a state of survival for many years, up until very recently. Like when I was a kid, thousands, if not millions, of people died every year because of famine. Mm-hmm. Right now, the world produces almost 3 times as much food as we all need to eat. Right now, people dying from hunger is an option. It's not because of lack of food. It's because the system hasn't still adapted to providing food for everyone. So right now, the world and humanity is in a state of seeking thriving, and we have every condition to thrive. But most of us still have a mentality of survival, and that is what leads into dictatorships or authoritarian leadership.
Yeah. Well, why do you think conscious leadership is so important right now?
Mm-hmm. I think leading or moving away from this era of power and survival and just blindly following others into an era of information, accessibility, and therefore influence, it requires leadership to adapt, right? Because right now, it's like we have so much information. Like we go on social media, we go on the internet, and we know what's going on the other side of the world. We know what other leaders are doing, other companies are doing, how people feel in other companies on the other side of the world. So that old style of leadership is no longer functional and no longer as effective as being aware of how we're showing up and how we're influencing others and moving from putting pressure to bringing people in, motivating, and working from purpose, which is essential in conscious leadership. It's like it's about impact and creating something and leading from purpose, and not just achieving goals, because if not, you'll have a bad consequence.
Yeah. Are there certain leaders or companies that you look to as good examples of conscious leadership?
Mm-hmm. Well, I love John Mackey, and I know he sold his company, but I think the whole concept of Whole Foods and the way he was doing business and all that it was very game changing, right? It was seeing things very differently, and his story is just amazing. So I love him. I think people like Ariana Huffington is doing great things. Jeff Weiner from LinkedIn is also doing amazing things. Then there's other people from other areas like Brene Brown, which is talking about vulnerability and being ourselves and being authentic. It's just amazing. From sports, I love sports, and I love Phil Jackson. And he, I think he was a perfect example in the 90s and the early in the early 2000s of being this poised coach who, amidst craziness, you really rarely saw him like yelling or getting out of this Zen state that he used to be. So I think there's many leaders who we can call conscious. A conscious leader is not a perfect person, so I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, it's just a good distinction.
Right. It's just a matter of being aware and being aware of how what's going on within us and what we are projecting and how we want to influence others.
You spoke a little bit about driving alignment and sharing purpose across teams. Like, what are some ways that leaders are doing that in a way that's intentional and respectful of their team?
I think a very powerful way of doing that is defining a company's purpose, which is what is the impact that we want to create. Not only profit. Profit is important, and I come from the business world. I studied business. I have a master's degree in business and entrepreneurship, and profit is essential for sustainability in the company. But if we accompany or we work together, like, yeah, we need profit, but we are also focused on impact. Like, what is the world that we want to help create? That helps people align, because that triggers our most basic programming in our brain, which is belonging. Right? We are social beings. We are made to belong to a tribe. We are structured to belong to a tribe. And in order to feel that we belong, we need to feel useful for the tribe. So, and that is like our instinct. That is our reptilian brain. So when we trigger that, and hey, we're contributing to the community, we're contributing to the market in this way, that helps people engage in a different way, and in a deeper level.
Yeah, something I've seen that's worked pretty well is, I think it was originally used at Salesforce, but they have a model called the V2 Mom.
Mm-hmm.
Vision, values, mission, obstacles, methods. I believe I'll make sure to double check. But that's something we do at our company too, is our company's got a V2 mom. Our teams have V2 moms, then individuals have V2 moms also. Mm-hmm. And what I've found is it has seemed to bring forth some awareness around and some around why we're doing what we're doing. Because I think sometimes our work can have a lot more purpose, but if we're not examining it, we can miss it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that not only a company can have a purpose, a team can have a purpose, and it ideally it is aligned with a company purpose. But even if your company, like if you're a leader within a company and the company is not openly expressing a purpose, we can define a purpose for our team. Like our team can be, our purpose for our team can be to serve others in this way, or to provide others this possibility, or whatever it is. So yeah, I think purpose is really important, and it like we can, and ideally we define it for ourselves, right, in our lives.
Yeah. The model you created, this SIR model, am I saying that right, SIR?
Yeah.
Is meant to serve as a guide to foster emotional, spiritual growth, leadership development, a number of other things. And you talk about it. It kind of came to you in a eureka moment. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about that moment and the SIR model?
Yeah, there's a build up to the moment. Nice. I've been like in the spiritual personal development world since I was a little kid. Since I was 7 years old, my mom got me into meditation. And about 6 or 7 years before that moment where the model came to me, I heard this Hindi guru mention different aspects of the being. And he only mentioned them, like he only named them. But they stuck in my mind, and I wrote them down when I got home, and then I started analyzing them. There was a feeling in my heart like this. There's something here. There's something for me to understand here, and I started using them as a guide to look at myself, to work on myself. And then one day, I was sitting on an airplane. I was coming back from Teotihuacan in Mexico. So I went to the pyramids. I did the whole thing. And I was sitting on the plane coming back to Costa Rica, which is where I live. And then the whole thing just clicked, right? It was like, oh, these 7 aspects, I can name them in this way. And when I name them in this way, which are the physical body, the emotions, the belief system, the intellect, the mind, the ego, and the self, or the being, right? It just all clicked. It was very clear that is the way we work, and at the same time, we can see organizations in that way. Right? When in an organization, structures and processes are the sum of the physical habits of people. Right? The way people do things physically is what we end up calling structure or processes. The way people feel, the sum of the way people feel, is what we call climate and environment. The sum of the belief systems of the people is what we call culture. The sum of the intellect, the gaps in our minds, the things we want to grow and understand, is what we call innovation and learning opportunities in business. The sum of the minds that go to the past and project into the future and make decisions today is what in business we call strategic planning, right? We go into the past, we project into the future, and then we develop an action plan for today. The way people see themselves as a group, right, which is the ego, the way I see myself, but the way we see ourselves as a group is the company's ego, which is the value proposal, right? So it was really clear of how if we want to change systems, as we want to change organizations and communities and all that, basically the change has to come from us. And when we have the model, we can actually address each aspect in a separate way, so that it becomes easier to trigger that social or community or organizational change.
Excellent. Yeah, I can see you on an airplane scribbling on the napkin.
It was really fun because I was just sitting there and I was ready. Like I usually sleep in planes. I don't know why. It's like I enjoy sleeping in planes, and I was sitting there and just about to fall asleep, and then it was I could like see. My mind works in images, so I can basically see the image of how they interact, and then took out pen and paper and started writing, and in 5 minutes I had the whole thing.
Yeah, and you definitely summarize it in being leadership in a way that's digestible. But any guidance on how you recommend people using the model to like put it into action?
As you stated in the book, it's like I divided aspect by aspect, and every aspect has tools. My recommendation in the workshops that I give and everything that I do, I tell people work with them separately. And when I say separately, is I like dedicate some time to address your belief systems and identify your core beliefs. Like, are they limiting you? Are they helping you expand and develop your potential? And change them. And then do the story in the mind, and then like separate them, because it becomes easier. Like I've been using the model for about 11, 12 years on myself. And it started like that. It started like, oh, this is a belief. I'm going to go work on that. This is an emotion. How do I deal with the emotion? This is a story in my mind. How do I transform the story in my mind? And after all these years, right now it's how we work, right? Which is right now it's a whole mess. I don't want to say a whole mess, but it's all meshed up, and I don't have to separate it in myself. Separation is just a way of understanding the different parts, so that later on, it's like if you're a mechanic and you drive a car, you hear things and you're like, oh, that's this part that's making a different noise, or that part is sounding right, and this, like you are able to just understand the different parts without having to put the car or to unassemble the car in order to see what's going on.
Yeah, I have a friend who will say his theory is that all the abstract painters are actually exceptional classical painters. And once you have that study and that foundation, it allows you to, take a little bit more liberties with the framework and freestyle a little bit.
Exactly. I love that image. Yeah. I agree.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a little bit about your upbringing, but when you look at your story, how do you connect the dots from, first learning to meditate at age 7 to the work you're doing at the cross section of leadership and purpose?
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's been a process of self-integration. And when I started meditating at 7, my mom told me, like, she prohibited me to tell others I was meditating. This was Costa Rica in the 80s. And it was still a very Catholic country, and there was still a lot of prejudice around meditation and doing stuff like that. So she warned me, and she said, don't say anything. At 18, my best friend, who had been my best friend since we were 6, found out, because he came to me and he said, hey, I found this amazing thing. It's called meditation. You should try it. I'm like, well, I've been doing it for 11 years. And he's like, what? What do you mean? It's like, yeah, my mom told me. What do you mean, your mom? Right. So it was really interesting, because he was the first person who found out I was meditating outside my family, my core family. And then I started doing family business consulting 17 years ago, and people started asking me, how do you keep yourself sane? Because you're dealing with emotions and with conflicts and all this all day long. I'm like, well, I have my own personal practice where I center myself and I let go of stuff and all that. It's like, people started telling me, would you teach us? I'm like, all right. So I basically, like, I closed my office at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. I opened it back up again at 7 with the conference table out of the conference room, the chairs out of the room, and we sat on the floor with a very different group, and I facilitated meditation. And then eventually someone asked me, like, why don't you do this in business? Like, you're dealing with businesses all day long. Why don't you bring this into business? I'm like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. So I started designing a program for businesses, and people would come into my office and see the program on my whiteboard. And they're like, oh, what is that? I started telling them, and they're like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that. And it was that process was, for me, it was sort of like coming out of the closet because of the meditation closet, right? Because it was exposing myself to, I'm not just a business consultant and person, I am also a spiritual person. I also look within and do meditation, do all these crazy things. And they help me be a better consultant, a human being, right? And there was still a challenge for me, and fear of being rejected if I was doing this or for sharing this. And eventually it just got accepted, or people started seeing the benefit in it. And I moved from doing family business consulting to doing conscious leadership and conscious business. And 7 years ago, I closed my family business consulting firm and I started doing this and haven't looked back. And I love what I'm doing, and it's been great.
Yeah. When you, especially the last 7 years, like, what are some things you look back on, or, what type of things, like, in your work world, do you get most excited about having the opportunity to do?
I think the most beautiful thing about the last 7 years, which have been the ones I've been doing this full time, is seeing the transformation in people. There's two things that happen usually. One is when I get to work with a group of leaders, always by, like, after a few sessions, people stop me when I'm going out of the business, or especially when I do it face to face. I used to do it face to face a lot. Right now, I do like 95% of my work online. But people would stop me on the hallway and would say, I don't know what you guys are doing in there, but my boss, he's changed a lot. Thank you for what you're doing. And that was beautiful, right? That feels so rewarding, because people around the leaders are being the recipients of the leader's personal development, right? And they are feeling better, they are enjoying more, they are feeling more recognized. And so being able to, or feeling that I am the catalyst for that transformation and the well-being for more than just the leader that I'm working with, is just the greatest feeling.
Yeah, that's awesome. If there was one piece of advice you'd give listeners, whether they're leading themselves or leading others, what would it be?
I'd say don't underestimate the time that we take to look within, right? With all of my clients, they end up learning that the more they look within and they learn how to deal with what's going on within, the greater the results they see outside of them. And the better that they can lead their teams, the better results that the whole organization gets. So the piece of advice would be, dedicate some time to just sit with yourself, look within. I call it meditation, but it could also be prayer. It could also be just silent times, like whatever you want to name it. But sitting in silence and looking within, what's going on within me, where's my mind going, learning how to deal with that comes up. It's one of the most powerful things. One, because we feel better about ourselves. We learn how to have a better relationship with ourselves. And then that ends up translating into better relationships with those around us and into results, which is in business, that is what we want. We want better results because that's what keeps the business thriving and growing, and we all eat from that business.
When you think back on what you've read and studied, do you have any recommendations for listeners?
There's so many paths I've walked. I think one of the most important things that I've done is I love religions, not because I'm religious, but because I love understanding the philosophy behind religions. And one of the things that has taught me is that we're all basically the same in essence. Like every religion talks about love in its core, and well-being. And so my recommendation would be practice diving into different things, right? It doesn't have to be religion. I mean, it's like if you are in marketing, dive into painting, into sports, into reading history. Like learn about other things, because what that does is it opens up our minds and it allows us to do better connections. And that's been my experience. Like the model, everything that I'm doing now. I studied psychology. I'm come from business, but I studied psychology. I am not a psychologist. I don't work as a psychologist, but a lot of the work that I do is with personal development, has to do with psychology. I studied psychology because I was interested in myself. I wanted to understand myself better. I've studied art. I love sports, and I have one of my clients is a school, and they're all women, and I tell them, it's like, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to hear about sports, because I truly believe that team sports are really important for human beings, right? We learn so much from sports, right? So so opening up our scope of the things that we learn is one of the greatest things we can do.
Cool. I mean, could you speak a little bit more about sports? I do work with a nonprofit called Beyond the Ball that aims to expose students to the careers and topics that are sports related that happen outside the field of play. So think like, kids, there are a lot of high schoolers out there that want to go pro and might have these starving interest in stadium design or shoes or data analytics, programming, etc. So I'd be curious to just learn, how you think about the role of sports in our lives and in society.
Mm-hmm. I think team sports, I think every sport, but especially team sports, teaches things like discipline. It's like I love basketball. That's what I played my whole life. I remember the first day I went to a court, I was about 12 years old. I couldn't get the ball to the basket, but I stuck with it. I went every day or every other day, and I was shooting the ball and shooting the ball and shooting the ball, and just until I learned how to shoot, right, on my own. So discipline, we learn also dealing with frustration, like dealing with losing, dealing with having the team that is not the best, dealing with having a teammate that messes up at the wrong moment, and then you lose the game, right? So dealing with frustration is really important. Learning to have a team and to rely on the team that day that you're not making the shots. Like learn to pass the ball. It's like you're not making the shots and not going in, fine. It's like pass the ball, find your teammate who's hot, right? Rely on your team. Who's strong, and like identifying strengths and weaknesses. So I have the certain strengths in playing defense. Other teammates have other strengths in playing defense. Can we change up the defense so that we play to our strengths instead of trying to keep up with a guy who we don't have the strengths to keep up with? So there's just so much that sports teaches us in a safe environment, right? Where we can lose and then we go home and we deal with the frustration, and then we come back the next day and we play again, right? Communication, right? That's essential in team sports. Like being able to tell your teammates, like, I'm going to do this, do that, like switch, right? Things, right? Just telling ourselves what's going on, right? There's just so much we learn, and it ends up being a reflection of an organization or of a business. A business is a team sport, right? It's like we have different teams, we have to rely on each other, we have different strengths, we have a single objective, which is win the game or create an impact. It's like I just love, like I see so much that I've learned through my playing of sports, that I truly believe that everyone should play team sports at some point in their life for a little bit, right? Just to learn basic stuff.
Totally. Yeah, it definitely is like an interesting classroom that the lessons can be applied to a host of other things across our lives. Rodolfo, you've been really interested in, really generous with your time today. What's the best way for people to keep up on the work you're doing?
I think you can find me on my webpage, which is serleader.com. And you can find me on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram as Rodolfo.Carrillo on all the platforms. And that's the easiest way.
Cool.
You can write to me directly through my webpage, and I'll get it on my inbox, so you'll get a response from me.
Very good. Well, we'll make sure to have that links to those outlets in the episode write-up. But Rodolfo, thanks for coming on the show today. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for having me. I love what you're doing. Doing a great job.
Thank you.